Tonight, should former President Trump be barred from future elections? The Supreme Court takes up a Colorado case to keep him off the ballot. We bring you the arguments, plus deal denied.
Surrendering to Hamas's delusional demands that we heard now not only won't lead to freeing the captives, it will just invite another massacre.
What comes next now that ceasefire talks have fallen through? And
our students continue to be hungry.
We head back to the campus of Asbury College, where just 1 year ago, God lit the flame of revival. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The Supreme Court weighs former President Trump's election eligibility. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments in the Trump ballot case. The highest court in the land now set to decide whether former President Trump is disqualified from seeking office. The
justices will determine whether Colorado's top court was correct in applying a post-Civil War provision of the Constitution to order Trump off the ballot. The Colorado court reached that conclusion after his actions around the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol amounted to insurrection. CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson is at the court. Abigail.
Well, John, after today's hearings, the Supreme Court could really decide at any time whether the insurrection provision in the Constitution disqualifies former President Trump from the ballot.
The Colorado Supreme Court's decision is wrong and should be reversed.
Trump's lawyers argue January 6th was an unorganized riot, not a planned insurrection.
This was a riot. It was not an insurrection. The events were shameful, criminal, violent, all of those things, but it did not qualify as insurrection.
Jason Murray, the plaintiff's attorney, disagreed, arguing the former president did indeed commit insurrection and specifically addressed the 14th Amendment as precedent.
Well, what they were concerned most about was ensuring that insurrectionists and rebels don't hold office. And I would note that if President Trump were appointed to an office today, if he were appointed as a state judge, he could not hold that office.
Throughout the arguments, all 9 justices appeared skeptical of whether or not states have the authority to remove Trump from the ballot under the 14th Amendment.
I think that the question that you have to confront is why a single state should decide who gets to be president of the United States. In other words, this question of whether a former president is disqualified for insurrection to be president again is, just say it. It sounds awfully national to me.
No, Your Honor, because ultimately it's this court that's going to decide that question of federal constitutional eligibility and settle the issue for the nation.
Many legal experts predict the Supreme Court seems unlikely to rule in favor of Colorado keeping Trump off the ballot.
A state cannot exclude any candidate for federal office from the ballot on account of Section 3, and any state that does so is violating the holding of term limits by altering the Constitution's qualifications for federal office.
President Trump says he's leaving his fate up to the justices.
An argument that is very important is the fact that you're leading in every race, you're leading in every state, you're leading in the country against both Republican and Democrat. And Biden, you're leading in the country by a lot. And can you take the person that's leading everywhere and say, hey, we're not going to let you run? I think that's pretty tough to do, but I'm leaving it up to the Supreme Court.
With the Colorado GOP primary set for March 5th, it is likely we will see an expedited decision from the Supreme Court within a few weeks. John, Jenna.
All right, CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson. Thank you, Abby. Well, John Malcolm is the vice president of the Institute for Constitutional Government and director of the Meese Center and the Simon Center at the Heritage Foundation. He joins us now for some legal analysis. John, welcome to you. So the justices' questions seem to lean in favor of former President Trump. Twofold question. What were your takeaways? And maybe if you can just back us up a little bit and remind us of how we got here with this particular case.
Well, we got here because a bunch of people who want to bounce Donald Trump from the ballot filed a lawsuit claiming that he was an insurrectionist who had previously taken an oath to support the Constitution, and as such, he was disqualified from holding the office of the presidency under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And they also argued that the states could make this decision without any implementing legislation from Congress, that it was up to each state to make that determination using whatever process existed in state law. I think today was a very good day for former President Trump. It's always perilous guessing from the arguments how a case is going to come out, but I think it's pretty clear that there are at least 5 justices to overturn the Colorado Supreme Court's decision, and it in fact would not shock me if it was a unanimous decision. There are a number of different grounds that they could rely upon, the chief ones being that he is not an officer of the United States. A president is not an officer of the United States under the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Also, that that provision is not self-executing and requires a federal legislation to decide the procedures for deciding whether to bounce somebody off of the ballot. Such legislation does not exist at the moment. And you heard from the question from Justice Kagan, and a lot of the other justices asked this question about how can it be that each state, using whatever processes they deem appropriate, make a determination about who qualifies and doesn't qualify to be on the ballot, particularly when the thrust of the 14th Amendment was to give the federal government more power, not the former Confederate states, leaving it up to them to decide who qualifies and who doesn't qualify.
To your point, Chief Justice John Roberts suggested that if the court ruled in favor of Colorado, elections could be left up to just a handful of states. He also said it could lead to some states removing the Republican nominee, other states removing the Democratic nominee off of ballots. John, your thoughts on that and the court really seeming to want to leave the power in the hands of voters?
It would be a complete mess if it was left up to each state. And I think that was patently obvious to all of the justices. The response they got was just trust the system to work itself out. And if there are really any major problems, you can review these on a case-by-case basis. I do not think the justices found that very satisfying at all.
About a minute left here, John. Could you see a situation in which the Supreme Court maybe issues a limited ruling just for Colorado and not other states?
Yeah, they could, but I don't think they're going to. They could say, yes, the states can do this, but the process that Donald Trump received was too truncated to satisfy due process of law elements. They could also say, well, that section disqualifies someone from holding the office. It doesn't prevent anyone from running for the office. So we'll kick this can down the road. They might do the second one, but I doubt it. I think that they want to resolve this issue and not have it come back up again at a time when it could even engender more chaos.
Yeah. All right, John Malcolm with the Heritage Foundation. John, always good to see you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks, John. Well, as the Supreme Court decides whether former President Trump should be barred from the ballot in Colorado, in Nevada, Donald Trump is expected to make a clean sweep of the state's Republican delegates in tonight's GOP caucus. Republican rival Nikki Haley is not participating there. Well, no charges against President Biden. That's the conclusion of the special counsel report into Mr. Biden's handling of classified documents while he was out of office. Special counsel Robert Hur is declining to take action, saying, quote, the evidence does not establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Although an investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency. The report adding his practices present serious risks to national security. Investigators concluded it would be difficult, though, to convict the president, saying he'd, quote, likely present himself to a jury as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
Overseas tonight, Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled to Israel this week to help broker a ceasefire. But as he returns home tonight, deadly combat continues in Gaza. Even so, Hamas leaders arrived in Cairo today to kick off a new round of talks with the Egyptian and Qatari officials helping with negotiations. It comes just a day after Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu flatly rejected what he called the delusional demands of Hamas, saying the Jewish state will continue to fight to eliminate Hamas within a matter of months.
The IDF creates wonders and is moving forward in a systematic way to get all the goals of the war that we, at the political level, required from it. The elimination of Hamas, the release of all hostages, and the promise that Gaza won't be a threat to Israel anymore.
As part of that process, Israel is now moving to expand its offensive near the Rafah crossing with Egypt. where an estimated 1 million displaced civilians are living in tent shelters. Rafah is the main entry point for much of Gaza's humanitarian aid. Egypt has warned Israel that attacking this area or forcing masses to flee across its border will endanger a 4-decade-old peace agreement with Israel.
In Ukraine, a shakeup in military strategy on the verge of the 2-year mark since Russia invaded the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky saying it's time for his top general to go. In a social media post marking the move, Zelensky wrote, "When it comes to the leadership of Ukraine's armed forces, the time for renewal is now."
Big Pharma under big scrutiny on Capitol Hill. Coming up, lawmakers lay into CEOs over the high cost of prescription drugs.
Welcome back. A bipartisan group of senators is seeking answers for the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs.
In a subcommittee hearing today, lawmakers emphasized the gaps between U.S. and overseas costs for a handful of drugs made by 3 major drug makers. CBN Washington correspondent Hillary Powell is tracking the story. Hillary, how did it come to a hearing?
Well, John and Jenna, the CEOs for these drug makers originally really didn't want to testify. 2 decided to speak to the committee only after being threatened with subpoenas. Lawmakers provided some really personal and intimate situations of constituents who often can't get help dealing with all of these crippling costs.
Her choice is to pay the $350 and go without food or pay her rent late, or not take the drug and risk heart attack or stroke.
Senator Chris Murphy's description of a patient covered by Medicare facing that kind of choice left one drug company CEO struggling to find words.
That is a choice no patient should have to make.
But she makes it. She makes it because you have chosen to price a drug at a point that is unaffordable.
That specific drug, Eliquis, used to treat blood clots and help reduce stroke risk. The CEOs of Merck, Johnson & Johnson, and Bristol-Myers Squibb faced intense questions from senators Thursday about why U.S. prescriptions are far higher than those in other countries. For example, annually, Bristol-Myers Squibb charges U.S. patients $7,100 for Eliquis, while that same product can be purchased for $900 in Canada and just $650 in France. Due to those costs, a Senate report shows 1 out of 4 Americans cannot afford the medicine prescribed by their doctors.
We are beginning to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry.
Committee Chairman Senator Bernie Sanders credits the Inflation Reduction Act for allowing Medicare to negotiate for lower prices. The CEO of Johnson & Johnson pushed back, arguing price caps don't help create newer products.
Congress should stop middlemen from taking for themselves the assistance that pharmaceutical companies intend for patients. And finally, it is essential that we reject the price caps and controls that exist in other countries which stunt innovation.
The companies did eventually agree to work on prices for patients most in need under Medicare.
There are still patients for whom this drug is absolutely not affordable. That's not acceptable. Medicare in particular is a space where we can't provide those types of copay support programs that we do in the commercial setting, so we would love to work with Congress on that.
So a lot of back and forth there, but brand name drug prices are generally substantially reduced by rebates that these drug makers actually give to pharmacy benefit managers and wholesalers, but the system really doesn't always pass savings along to patients. Legislators say they want to see more transparency in all this and find out just where some of that money in the product chain is going, you guys.
Hillary, why is there still such a huge discrepancy in what U.S. patients pay for drugs like these versus patients overseas?
That's really what they were also trying to get to the heart of today. Unlike other countries, the U.S. government doesn't directly regulate prescription prices. In Europe, for example, governments actually put caps on what state-funded healthcare programs will pay. So they are also trying to keep costs down for people there.
All right, Hillary Powell reporting. Thank you so much, Hillary. Well, also at the U.S. Capitol, Republicans are helping advance a borderless bill on foreign aid in the Senate. After months of negotiations, then ultimate failure over attaching immigration provisions into a foreign aid package, GOP senators are now delinking border funding in a standalone Senate bill. The package could deliver tens of billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel.
An outpouring of epic proportions, but will it happen again? Up next, we head to this Kentucky college to mark 1 year since revival broke out there. It has been 1 year since the biggest revival in more than 50 years broke out at Kentucky's Asbury University. It lasted for over 2 weeks, but its impact felt far and wide.
On the anniversary today of when revival began to break out, many are asking, will it happen again? CBN's Wendy Griffith traveled to Asbury for this story.
The small town of Wilmore, Kentucky, had not seen an outpouring of this magnitude in more than 50 years. For 16 days and nights, students and others worshiped and experienced the presence of God. What began as student-led prayer at a scheduled chapel service February 8th led to something extraordinary. Asbury President Dr. Kevin Brown says there's still a feeling of expectancy in the air, even a year later.
Our students continue to be hungry. They continue to lead. They've gone and they've shared. We've had over 50 groups go to different ministries and churches, both in the United States and overseas.
This is Hughes Auditorium here at Asbury, where for more than 2 weeks, the Holy Spirit showed up in such a way that it drew not only students, but people from around the world, hungry for a taste of His glory.
God turned my world technicolor. And I don't know how else to describe it, but prayer came alive. I mean, I saw physical healing, cancer be removed. I saw, like, physically cancer off somebody's neck be removed. I saw emotional healing, relational healing. There were 2 other girls and now my boyfriend, and we spent literally every waking moment. We did not sleep, and we stayed there for 2 weeks.
It was an overwhelming glimpse of just God, you know, like His goodness, His mercy, His grace, His firmness. It was a glimpse of what heaven's going to be like when we get to just reign and dwell with God forever.
Oh my word, yeah. I don't think I'd ever experienced that type of love from God before. Like, I thought 100%, like, this is, like, I've done too many things. I've messed up too many times. Like, I'm too far gone. Like, I thought all of those things, and yet God met me with such grace and compassion.
I knew we were encountering something, but it was like halfway through the weekend when I was like, this is really special.
Pastor in residence Zach Merkreebs was the one preaching that day and admits it took some time to realize the extent of what was happening and says it's still in the air a year later.
The temperature on campus is unbelievable. But what's exciting is they're longing for authentic, long-term steps, not just like 16 days of power. And they're wanting to pursue holiness. They want to be done with porn. They want to be done with addiction to their phones. They want to be done with those kind of things. They want to really have authentic walk with the Lord. And what's amazing is that's happening here.
Another result happened when the original Asbury House, built in 1850, became a prayer room for students.
I think one thing that the outpouring did, it took down a lot of walls that maybe we have about who God is.
What's more, enrollment is up about 25% after 2023 saw the largest incoming freshman class in 25 years.
It was a significant spike in our students, and our enrollment looks strong for the upcoming year as well. So we're really excited about that.
And the revival did the marketing for you.
It really did.
The revival that started here last February didn't stay here at Asbury. What do you think the span is? Can you even measure the span of this revival?
On one hand, yes, we can talk about students went here are the numbers, here's the social media feed. I'm more interested in the long-term influence of what we're seeing with this generation.
Do you think it's going to come back here?
I don't know, but I will say if it does, it won't be because we plan it. It will be because that's what the Lord chooses to do.
Brown says you can't put revival in a bottle.
I think that we would try to recreate it. That's what we do. That's what humans do.
Brown adds that from his perspective, a key generation found itself at the center of revival.
During those 16 days, there was always Gen Z represented at the altar. And the very last day that we had a formal service together, I'll never forget, someone stood in front of all these students, 1,500 Gen Z students in the room, and said, "You will not be the generation defined by depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicidal ideation." And to hear a cry come up from that group, someone said, if we had the spiritual eyes to see it, we would have seen an altar filled with loosened chains. That's my heart. That is the heart of the people around me, that this is a burdened generation, but God wants to use them, and we need to invest in them.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Wilmore, Kentucky.
Well, how new technology is helping the world remember a revolutionary man of faith. We explain next.
Well, finally tonight, the Italian city of Rome is honoring one of its most historic figures.
Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor who embraced Christianity, enabling its spread throughout the empire. A 42-foot statue of Constantine is on display in the Capitoline Gardens. It's a replica of a statue the emperor commissioned in 312 AD, reconstructed by using 3D modeling from some of the original pieces. History records Constantine's conversion to Christianity came after he prayed for victory in battle and had a vision of a cross with the words, "In this sign, conquer."
I think the next time either one of us are in Rome, that's a place to go visit.
Yeah, isn't that neat that he had a vision? I love that story.
I actually had never heard that.
Yeah, I hadn't either. That's pretty cool.
Well, thanks for watching.
Have a great night.